This is a strange poem, and as many of Dickinson's are, this world is not conclusion, but it's yeah, one of her more famous ones, and a lot of people kind of debate what this one means. So if you're a bit stuck on it, then that's completely normal, I think, for this poem. I've seen professional, published poets sit and read this poem and get really confused about the meaning and debate it. So yeah, if you're just a student, then definitely don't worry if you're slightly confused. Um, this sort of opening statement, though, is very definitive. This world is not conclusion, full stop. So you might analyze the full stop there. It means this world is not the end. So for Dickinson, who's someone who struggled with religion throughout her life and was very uncertain, she at times she's kind of agnostic, at times she's borderline atheist. That's a very definitive, certain statement for someone who's very uncertain and unsure of herself. So maybe she's trying to convince herself a little bit there that there's something more to life after life. Maybe she's sure that there's something, but she's not sure what that something is. So she's basically exploring different potential options. You could see it as a possibly like agnostic poem where she's not committing to one particular answer. So before we delve further into the poem, I want you to just write down your thoughts on what happens after this world. So after death, after we I don't know. It's you might have just have woken up and you're starting to do a lesson in the morning or something, or you're really tired and you're going to bed and you're just like, I really want to think about this right now. But I think it's important to kind of engage with it for the sake of understanding this poem, and also I have a personal belief that the more that you do engage with those questions, the better life you actually have, because you've kind of like thought about lots of different possibilities and eventualities. So yeah, unfortunately, even though it's a little bit morbid and dark, write down what you think happens after death. And it could just be nothing as well. It depends on your belief. So hopefully you've written that down. So yeah, she has this idea that a species stands beyond. There's some kind of creatures or living entities that kind of are beyond this world. You could interpret that as aliens. I think probably what she means is not exactly aliens, but like angels or kind of beings that exist beyond our physical present reality that we live in. So yeah, she thinks that a living species, some kind of entities, stand beyond what we can see around us now. You may also interpret that as ghosts, so it might just be the essence of people who've passed on still exists around. They're invisible as music, but positive as sound. Invisible and positive are very interesting adjectives to analyze there. Very strange juxtaposition of those adjectives. That world calls to us and it also confuses us. So after she's been so sure of herself, she then goes back on her certainty and says, actually, it is really confusing at the same time. And philosophy can't explain it. And intelligence, it doesn't really matter how intelligent you are, how much you study philosophy. No one has the perfect answer to the problem of life after death. It's a sort of eternal riddle that we feel like we can probably never solve, but at the same time, it's completely worth constantly devoting your life to that thought or that interpretation. You may disagree with her here. I've had conversations with friends who hate to think about these things and they're just like, there's no point. So you might have that kind of reaction. But it's interesting to sort of explore your personal connection to the poem and whether you're aligned with her or kind of, like on a different perspective from her. So she sees it like a riddle, and she thinks that even scholars, even top researchers and philosophers are still puzzled by it. And, in order to try and understand it a bit more, men have allowed themselves to be shunned by society for generations. So there's a sort of tradition that very forward-thinking men and women who have beliefs that are not kind of like the norm for their time, they get shunned by society and they have to kind of live as outcasts, or sometimes their name might even be dragged through the mud, or that kind of thing. If you look at the ancient Greek philosophers, there's quite a lot of them that this type of thing happens to. And then later on, hundreds of years later, they're proven correct and they're proven right. It's interesting, that idea of it in this poem, because Dickinson herself was a kind of, she sort of took herself out of society in a lot of ways and didn't really actively participate in her local community. She did write more generally to great minds of her era and wrote a lot of letters, but she didn't travel anywhere and she didn't really go outside of her home environment very much. So maybe she thinks of herself as, one of these types of people, these kind of outcasts who's too forward thinking for their time. And probably she would be right if she did think that, because her poetry became really popular after she died, because it was a lot more aligned with, later generations and how they thought and felt about the world than it was with people of her time. So, men have allowed themselves to even be crucified for answering the question of life after death, a reference to Christianity there, but also, again, a reference to anyone who's sort of spoken up for their beliefs at any time and been shunned by society. Faith falters and laughs and fights against it. Faith blushes if anyone sees it doing this, is nice personification of faith. The idea of faith, or the theme of faith, is a really interesting one to explore with this poem. So it's like belief in something even though you have no proof. You might also want to write down your thoughts about faith. I've really wavered in my life between, when I was younger, I thought faith was really ridiculous. Like, why would you believe in something if there's no proof? And then now I have faith in a lot of things that I really don't have proof for. And that actually kind of helps me more in my life, I think, weirdly. So yeah, if you're going to look into, it's not necessarily religious either, it's just the actual theme of faith, or the idea of having faith in anything, a bit like hope as well. You might want to look into different ways that you can have faith or not have faith, and how that alters your life perspective. So yeah, there's a sense that, you pick at a random twig of evidence and ask a weather vane if it can point the way to the answer. So it's just sort of stabbing in the dark, randomly trying to pick out a tiny little piece of this puzzle that is such a complex, difficult issue that, there's no way that you're going to just randomly come across the answer by fiddling around like that. So there's a sense of, at the end, that, a priest stands at a pulpit and gestures. Strong hallelujahs roll back at them. So even though, we don't really know what happens after death, everyone really supports the churches in this time, especially. Everyone's hyper religious. They unquestioningly follow the priest, even though if they did start to question, they might actually find problems with that. And then a really ambiguous, difficult final line that basically means that drugs can't stop the tooth that eats away at the soul. So it's like there's no medicine that cures you of this kind of illness if you're fixated on the idea of life after death, which in itself is a kind of placeholder for, if you're a philosophical person, if you're interested in these big questions that we have about existence and our purpose in the world and how we fit into nature and that kind of thing, which Dickinson very much is. So it's almost like something's eating away at her soul, forcing her to engage with these questions, even though she knows there's no answer, and she's exploring why. Why would I do that? I'm really similar, so I really get this as an idea, but like I say, I have a lot of friends who really don't get it either. So definitely apply your own perspective and the own way that your mind works to it, and see if you can understand why she's like this, or why certain people are like this. So it's very abstract exploration of the question, what happens when we die, without any specific answers. So poetry is actually a very good medium to explore this in, because poetry is there to kind of not give us straightforward answers. It's a medium of writing that encourages ambiguity and symbolism rather than definite answers and concrete information. So yeah, she kind of mocks and spurns all of the different ways that people explore and approach this question. But then at the end, there's a Volta, there's that turning point where she says, well, even though I can see how silly it is, there's something that eats away at me that is obsessed with this question. So I'm a philosophical person, even though I kind of resent philosophical people. And I'm a spiritual person, even though I kind of resent the way that everyone unquestioningly follows religion. So so it's very interesting personal exploration of her faith and her spirituality. So the main thing structurally with this one, the final two lines, there's a contradiction, there's a turning point there. We call this a volta. So human nature, we're conflicted beings, we're kind of unusual because we're obsessed with this question and we know that it's pointless, but then we still want to know anyway, and lots of people's entire lives and careers are dedicated towards answering this thing which we know there's no answer for. It's kind of like pointing at that strange, unusual quality in humans, that we strive always for knowledge and greater knowledge. So techniques wise, there's quite a lot in there. There's similes, there's plosive alliteration, it beckons and it baffles. That's kind of like underscoring the power of this question. There's a lot of personification of faith and general kind of exploration of like abstract nouns. So you might want to sort of circle the abstract nouns in the poem. That would probably help you. And so the full stop that we have at the beginning of that short sentence, that's the first line, we call that an end stopped line. So you might want to analyze that as well. The rest of the poem kind of flows, but the first very definitive, very short statement, this world is not conclusion, is kind of underscored by a full stop, which is an end stopped line. It's quite interesting, the kind of abstract lyrical exploration of this. So the form, we would call it a lyric poem because it's not got a story to it, it's just exploring an idea. If you want to explore the form more or analyze that in your essays, you want to call it a lyric poem, and then just research a little bit what lyric poetry is, or the tradition of lyric poetry as well. So a couple of important points here then. So religion and philosophy in Dickinson's mind are very similar. A sort of modern atheist might disagree with that because very often modern atheists, when they don't have religion, kind of look to philosophy as the way to explain, those answers or those questions that religion might sometimes, force us to think of it as a certain way. So you might disagree that religion and philosophy are similar, but she definitely in this poem conflates the two, and she sort of sees them as branches of a similar purpose or something like that. They're almost interchangeable in the poem. Definitely this idea that no one truly knows what happens after death. No one can know for sure. And the world around us, she's equally sure, which is quite interesting, that this world is not everything. So even though she doesn't know what happens after death, she knows that this is not it. This is not just what we see around us. So it rejects a philosophical belief called materialism. So materialism in philosophy is where you think this world is conclusion. You think this is it. This is all we have. This is all we can see and measure. So Dickinson, despite not really knowing what she is in this poem or what she believes, there's certain things she can know, and she's very sure that materialism is not correct. It's not correct philosophy. So you might want to write down your own philosophical thoughts about these ideas. Are you spiritual? Are you a materialist in terms of thinking that you believe in what you can measure and what you can physically see? Do you definitely believe in something beyond this world? If you do, is that religious, or is it just philosophical, or is it more abstract? So yeah, it's one of these poems that's a sort of springboard into thinking and making up your own kind of opinions and decisions about life after death and the nature of the world and what we can measure versus what we can't measure. Very, very philosophical poem. So it's a difficult poem. If you need more help on it, there's notes on the scribbly page that I made that go, into detail with context and themes and lots of other things. So definitely check that out if you want more support with this one, because it's not an easy one. But yeah, I found it very interesting for my own beliefs. It kind of like helped me kind of cross-reference what I think versus what she thinks, and some of it's similar and some of it's different. So hopefully you can, do something similar with your own beliefs. So yeah, thank you for listening to this one, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon in another scribbly class. Bye for now.